This is a unique podcast exploring the criminal justice system and those involved and affected. We'll educate and expose the public as well as potential jurors to what takes place behind the scenes of those who are facing the system. Your host owns a litigation support firm called Justice Technology Professionals, and he works on criminal and civil cases offering support to defendants and counsel. What you're about to hear is an open dialogue, opening the minds to the public to what takes place in reality as opposed to what you think takes place. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Justice Tech Pros podcast. Here's your host, Dominic Crea.
Hello listeners, hope everybody's doing well. I'm excited about today's episode. I'm going to be joined by guest Matthew Mary. He's a well-known, well-respected criminal defense attorney. And recently, he launched a new podcast called A View from Mulberry Street. And it could be found on YouTube. And in fact, if you go to the description under this video, you'll see a link to his podcast. So please be sure to check it out. And today we're going to be discussing the podcast amongst some other things. And we're going to have a good chat and a good conversation. I believe the audience will enjoy it. I always enjoy speaking with Matt. Last time I had him on, I, and attorney Anthony DiPietro, we discussed the Carmen Persico issue that was hitting all the news. And if you haven't listened to that, just go into the past episodes and you'll see it. So without further ado, please allow me to welcome my guest, Matthew Mary. Matt, again, I just want to thank you for coming back on. And it's a pleasure to have you on again, sir.
Okay.
And I figure today I wanted to really dive into your podcast, A View from Mulberry Street, because I watched the episodes and I tell you, I'm already hooked. It's captivating, it's informative, and it's right up my alley.
Yeah. I'm glad that you like it. We're getting a pretty good response so far. I mean, we put 2 episodes up and a little trailer, and it seems that there's a lot of interest.
And what, maybe you just want to tell the listeners, what really caused you to go this route, the podcast route? Because I know you have a very successful radio show, and then you branched out.
It's such a long story. Well, it's not that long a story, I can tell it. You know, I started out life on Mulberry Street. My first residence was on top of Angelo's restaurant at 146 Mulberry Street, and I lived there until I was about 7, and then we moved to a place not too far away, like about a mile away, called Knickerbocker Village, or on the Lower East Side, euphemistically known as the 4th Ward. So I spent my whole early life, from birth until 30 years old, down on the Lower East Side. And, you know, I met a lot of people, a lot of characters. Not everyone that I knew got into trouble, but enough people got into trouble from when I was a little boy until I became a man to inspire me to be a criminal defense attorney. And I started out with the Legal Aid Society for 3 years and taking, indigent clients. And in 1979, I started my own law practice, and I've been in the practice of criminal law from 1979 until the present time. And, I kind of gravitated to what we call organized crime cases, mostly RICO cases and all of that stuff. So, my experience at the federal courthouse was quite a surprise when I started out as a young man. I didn't understand how federal court was designed from the beginning of the court system, from the beginning of the Southern District of New York, the first federal court district. The entire system, and this has nothing to do with Italian Americans and the mob and all that stuff.
Right. You're just talking about the system in general.
The court system, the federal court system, was devised historically to make sure that the government wins every case that it's a party to. And, you kind of say, wow, that's pretty unfair. I mean, I can understand that. Also being a student of history and of the history of the United States. And I could understand how the federal court system was built with the idea of the government always having an advantage. But then in the 60s, when the federal court system took a left turn and started to take over all these criminal cases, all the drug cases, and they started to usurp the authority of the state courts in reference to criminal law, and everything kind of changed for me. Like, I kind of saw this system as very oppressive, and from a lawyer's point of view, you kind of scratch your head and say to yourself, how could I ever win a case at this courthouse?
Right.
But then in 1970 they passed the RICO law, which at that point in time, let's see, I was about 30 years old then. Gotcha. They didn't start using the RICO law until 1980 and the 80s. That's when Rudy Giuliani went, full force using the RICO law.
Right.
And, the RICO law is one of the things that I talk about on my podcast. It is a law which makes it virtually impossible for a criminal defense lawyer to win a case. But anyhow, during the 46 years of law practice, I've seen a lot of things, and I was always kind of obsessed with the way organized crime or the so-called mafia is portrayed in the media. All the movies are the same thing. All the documentaries are the same thing.
Yes.
Everything you see on TV, from a half-hour short to a 3-hour special, it's the same old nonsense, the same old propaganda. And I'm not saying that all of my clients are angels. They certainly aren't.
Of course. I understand that.
But what irks me and has bothered me is that the public is so deceived when it comes to these cases. Nobody knows what goes on behind the scenes.
No.
And when you have a certain group of people, kind Americans, right, who the government believes are involved with organized crime, I'm not saying that I don't want the government to arrest them.
Right.
I just want them to be treated just like everyone else, and to have all the rights and the privileges that a defendant has in criminal court. And when it comes to organized crime cases, these people are investigated in a different way than everyone else. Well, let me put it to you this way. Most of your listeners out there, if they're normal people, right, they probably think that when a crime is committed, law enforcement, whether it be the police or the FBI, gathers all the evidence, and they try to figure out who is responsible for a certain crime.
Right.
And so they investigate, and they find evidence, and when they get evidence enough to accuse someone, they give it over to the district attorney or the United States attorney, and then the U.S. attorney, sends it to the grand jury, and the case begins, and you have a trial, or maybe you have a settlement, what we call plea bargaining, and that's the way it goes. But in organized crime cases, they don't start off with a crime and try to find out who committed the crime. They start off with a person.
Yeah, they start off with a target. They start off with a target. Yep.
A target. And, they have a big list. And if you go to any FBI office, you'll see, right, not in the secret room, right out in they have these charts, the so-called families, and the boss, the underboss, the concierge, the captains, the soldiers, the associates. I actually was locked in a room down in Foley Square by accident one day, waiting to talk to agents on a case about getting my client's property back. And I was in a little room, and they had different books about different families. What I mean, books with pictures.
Wow.
And, since I was in this room by myself, I couldn't help but to take a peek. And, and so, like, the first book would be the administration, and pictures of all these guys. Second book is the soldiers, right? Then they had a third book, right? The associates, the guys who are nobody, but they're hanging around somebody. Right. And those are the associates. A lot of pictures, more pictures than you could ever imagine.
And as we know, Matt, their room for associate ranges. You could just say hello to somebody, and all of a sudden, boom, you're an associate.
Hey, listen, here's the best. So now I see the final book is a book marked Kids, Kids. And I'm saying to myself, what the hell could this be? And I open it up, and there's pictures of kids or like teenagers, and I'm saying to myself, are these like the kids of the so-called soldiers and associates? Who are the kids?
Right.
And at that moment, the FBI agent that I was waiting for walked into the room. And he said, what are you doing in here? You're not supposed to be in here. I said, well, somebody put me in here and locked me in here. I said, so I figured I could help myself.
Make myself comfortable.
Yeah, we all started to laugh. We both started to laugh. There were a couple of other agents in there too. And I said, listen, guys, I understand what these books are about, but could you please tell me who are the kids? And believe it or not, the FBI agent told me those are kids that hang out in the various social clubs or outside the social clubs. These are the kids who might do errands for the guys in the social clubs, like go and get them a pack of cigarettes or something like that.
Gotcha.
And
they had a whole binder for that. Oh,
wow. A whole binder. And
wow.
I said, well, what's the purpose of this? He said, and I couldn't believe it. He said, today's kids are tomorrow's men. And, we're ready for everything. So the targeting is intense. And, I have represented clients who are not marked by the FBI, the government, as bosses or captains. They were just, they call soldiers, right? And they would have squads. I could actually talk about a couple of guys who have passed away who are very close to me, very close personal friends, Jerry Chili and Junior Chili, and Jerry's son Joey, all of whom are all deceased now. And they had a thing called the Chili Squad.
Okay.
And, I became aware of that. And I told Jerry Chili and Junior Chili about that. I said, there's a whole squad just for you guys. Yeah, with you.
So it's like a unit, Matt, that's just assigned to those people.
A unit of the FBI that was in charge of pursuing the so-called Bonanno family. And within that was a squad.
Right.
And they called it the Chili Squad. And, Jerry Chili is scratching his head. He said, well, have a squad for me for what? Like, sometimes they're pursuing guys that can't even, get out of their own way.
Right.
But anyhow, that's the intensity of it all. And I was talking to an FBI agent one day, and I said, I know that you guys are targeting, you break yourselves up into different groups, the so-called Bonanno family, the Colombo family. So they make their organization a mirror of these other organizations.
Yeah, you were talking about that on your episode, and I found that very interesting, the way you laid that out, because as you said earlier, the public really doesn't understand how it goes. And we're not saying anybody's a saint. It has nothing to do with that. It's just if you're going to charge somebody, you're going to put them through the system, you just want it to be equal across the board. That's all.
Sure. You want a fair chance. Yep. And, I was telling an FBI agent one day who was, he was investigating one of my clients, had been for years.
Right.
And I said, you're assigned to investigate this guy. And you've been investigating him for 4 years, and you didn't bring a charge yet against him, correct? And he said, yeah, that's right. I said, how does that make you feel? And he said, it makes me feel pretty shitty. I said, well, how does your boss like that? My boss doesn't like that. And I said to him, well, it seems to me that you're under a lot of pressure to arrest this individual, right? Because if you spent 30 years already and you came up with nothing, your boss isn't happy with you. His response was, I'll get him sooner or later. And they did.
Yeah.
And believe me. So this is the intensity of the targeting. And what the public doesn't understand, they think, oh, yeah, these guys, they commit crimes left and right. Well, I'm not saying crime isn't committed, but that's not the way the investigations go. The investigations don't start with a crime, seeking out the criminal. They start with the person that they want to get. And if you're on the big board, okay, and they have you as part of if you're associated with an organized crime family, as they define that,
right,
you are in for trouble. I mean, you're done.
Yep.
The goose is cooked.
Yep.
And let me tell you, as a criminal defense lawyer, and I know many investigators who feel the same way,
Sure.
the government kind of wants to run you over too, because you're standing in their way.
Yes.
You're standing in the way of their dinner.
Yep.
They are hungry. They want to eat, and you're standing in front of what they want to devour. And so it's a high pressure life to live as a lawyer or as an investigator who works on these kinds of cases. And I just thought that it would be interesting, especially in the advent of all these podcasts that are unbearable, so unbearable.
Oh, I'm right with you with that. And that's actually, when you said that on your podcast, it was like I was inside your head, because you were talking about the Informant podcast and how they're just flooding all these different platforms with their nonsense and their lies. And this went on for years and years without any other side to it. And that's actually how that whole We Push Back thing starts. It's just another side. It's just, there has to be another voice, another side of. There isn't only just one story to these truths, you know. And
there are very few voices like ours.
Absolutely.
People who are not afraid to stand up. And somebody said to me, "Oh, you're doing this podcast. It seems like you're attacking the government." Well, I said, I'm not attacking the government. I said, there's a million movies out there. And there are documentaries, and there's stuff like Fear City, which is BS, 100% BS. The producers from Fear City, who are from England, they called me. They found me. I had 3 meetings with them, and they wanted me to be on that show. And I said, you know what? I'd be delighted to be on your program. But how long is it going to air? What will be the final time on the air? 3 hours. I said, okay, I want 15 minutes or 10 minutes to say what I want to say about the commission case. And, the whole thing's about the commission case, how that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, I didn't even watch it. Yeah,
it's painful.
Yeah.
It's painful. Listen, and I said to them, I said, look, I'll do it, but you got to give me 10 minutes of unedited point of view.
Right.
And I supplied these people from England who did that Fear City thing with thousands and thousands of government documents that were uncovered accidentally 30 years after the fact, after they were hidden during the commission case. Documents which could have helped Carmine Persico defend himself in the commission case. Documents with, the whole thing in the commission case is they said that Carmine Persico, who had been in prison during most of the activity described in the commission case, that Carmine Persico was responsible as a defendant, they say, because they say he was the boss of the so-called Colombo family,
right.
Okay? And even though he was in jail, they said he's responsible. He's responsible because the underboss, the consigliere, the captains, they're all working on his behalf.
Yeah, they lay out that whole hierarchy stuff.
So he's vicariously responsible, even though he's in jail all the time.
Yeah, as he's locked up 24/7.
Right. And nobody ever came to see him. There's no allegation in the commission case that someone ever got his approval on anything. But the very fact that he was the boss, they say, enables them to put him into the commission case as a defendant. Yep. And now what they did is they hid documents that were discovered accidentally by Anthony DiPietro and Angela Clemente independently. And these documents.
Well, as we know, if it's out there, Anthony's going to find it.
For sure.
Yeah.
And these documents actually said there were FBI rats, Greg Scarpa, saying that someone other than Carmine Persico was they called the boss. There were 2 FBI agents who filed reports during that time, during the commission case, while it was on, that a second and a third person was the boss of the family. So it seems there's some confusion about that in the government circles from the FBI, from their upper echelon informants, about who was the boss of Colombo family. Yet they prosecute Carmine Persico anyhow, and they suppress this evidence. We find it 30 years later, bring it to a judge's attention, say to the judge, the guy's done 32 years out of 100, all right? Why don't you let him go? Let's re-sentence him to time served.
Right.
And by the way, people don't understand that the commission case is nothing more than a bid rigging case. The top 4 companies in the construction industry in New York City had an agreement with each other, and the government claims that organized crime was involved in that agreement, where 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the top construction contracts would be given to the top 4 companies in the construction industry. And that was the commission case, not much more than that.
Right.
And all of those construction guys, they don't even get indicted. All they have to do is rat,
Yep.
and say, we wouldn't have, these guys, they made us do it, right? The devil made me do it.
Right.
And so all these organized crime guys, they should have gotten like 10 years. Maybe you want to give them an extra 5 because you say they're part of organized crime. Well, that's 15, okay? Now you say that they're the bosses. They're the bosses of the crime family. So give them another 5 years, right? Now we're up to 20.
Right.
But how could you give them 100 years? And these guys are dying in jail. They're dying in jail, and no one gives a hoot. No one gives a hoot about it. No one wants to hear about it.
Well, you know what the problem is, Matt, that I encounter a lot is, unfortunately, people don't understand the point we're trying to make. I get attacked. I get people saying, oh, you're glorifying the mob. And they don't comprehend. I don't know if it's because they're ignorant or they're just not that intelligent. It has nothing to do with glorifying anything. All we're trying to say is you can't have different sets of rules for different types of people. Because what the public doesn't understand, it's just a matter of time till once again they evolve those rules to go after somebody else.
And listen, that's not just speculation on our part or anyone's part. That has actually occurred over these decades. And let me tell you, many a congressman who's been charged with the RICO Act has probably regretted voting for it.
Right.
Because they got away with passing the RICO Act because they want to obliterate organized crime from the face of the earth at all costs. Right. At all costs, okay? And everybody swallowed that. Okay, yeah, let's swallow that. That's okay. We'll go along with that at all costs, no matter what. Let's do anything that has to be done.
And as you pointed out in your podcast, that statement is so dangerous, at all costs. No, there's something that should be monitoring that. It can't be at all costs. I was really glad the way you highlighted that on your podcast.
Yeah, and so they use it against the people that they declare to be part of organized crime, but they use it against congressmen, they use it against big businessmen, they use it against anybody they can use it against if it's convenient for them.
Right.
And they do it. And what people don't understand is they say, oh, what's the RICO Act? No one knows it. No one can. Regular lawyers and criminal lawyers who don't practice in federal court, when I tell them stories about these RICO cases, right, and what the government does, they don't believe me.
No.
They actually look at me in the face and say to me, Matt, government can't do that. And I say, yeah, but they've been doing it for decades. They're doing it since it was passed in 1970. They're using it, exponentially since 1980. And the RICO Act, people, most of your listeners out there, if they're normal people, they think that if you get accused of a crime, you go to trial on that crime. Right. The jury decides if you're guilty or you're not guilty.
And they weigh the evidence of that crime. They don't weigh reputation or allegations. Sure. They're supposed to weigh the evidence.
In a RICO case, they're allowed to bring, let's say, 5 or 10 different crimes that are committed or alleged to be committed in different time periods that have nothing to do with each other. And so they could bring all those crimes in, and they could put you in a case with 5 or 10 people, some of whom you don't even know, because they say if they can prove that there's an enterprise, like the crime family, right? By the way, that enterprise, aside from the Bonanno family, the Colombo family, the Gambino family, aside from that, later on the enterprise became Chase Bank. The enterprise became this or that, or the other legitimate entities were defined by the government as criminal enterprises. And that definition, and they're allowed to prove that in court, not for the face of it, but to show that they could bring a RICO case, okay? So they say, all right, you're all part of the crime family, so we're allowed to bring all these different crimes and put all you different people together. Now, how the hell, a juror might think, if you're charged with a crime, a single crime, a juror will evaluate those facts and may decide to acquit you. But if you're charged with 5 or 6 crimes, what juror in the world is going to acquit you? They're going to say, maybe this is a mistake once, but there's 5, 6 different incidents, and then they put you together with other guys. Let's say you're a bookmaker, right? You're in the gambling business. They put you together with another guy, and he's got a murder charge. Whoa! Tell me that doesn't taint the mind of a juror?
Of course.
They're able to do it. And let's again emphasize to your listeners. So they started with organized crime, and no one cared. No one gave a damn. Okay, yeah, you can do that to them. But you know what? They do it to everybody.
Because they don't see the bigger picture, and I get I have some great listeners, and then I got some wackos, and stalkers and all that. But a lot of the comments I get, they'll say, well, they're all bad guys, so they should be in jail anyway. And they don't understand. That's fine. You could think that, but that's not how the Constitution works. That's not how
supposed to be that way.
That's right. Everyone, that's not how the law is supposed to work.
What makes this country so great is if you look at the law, the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, the guarantees that we have, and what the law is supposed to be, it makes you want to cry how great it is, how beautiful it is, how we live in a country where, back in the day, before this country started, people in England, the king could throw you in jail for any goddamn thing he wanted to do.
Right.
If you're an opponent of the king, or the king likes your wife, or whatever it may be, you get thrown in jail, and that's it. And now, the people who founded this country, the documents of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and all our initial laws, all were beautiful, beautiful things to guarantee freedom. And, you do put people away. I told you from the beginning of the federal court system, everything's leaned toward the federal government. So the federal government don't need all the things that we're talking about to put bad guys in jail. I'm saying, hey, listen, I want the public to know what's going on over here. And it's a disgrace because so many people have just died in jail. And I'm not saying for nothing, like, Dom, you want to give my client 5, 10 years for something good. Don't give him 40 years when he deserves 5. And the way people...
And then if you compare those to people that doesn't have a label and they aren't supposedly part of an organization and they may have done much worse crimes, and you can't even compare the sentencing. The sentencing is completely different. Completely different.
When you talk about sentence, here's a big one that no one believes. No lawyer, no regular person. In federal court, as you know, when it comes time for your sentence, the U.S. attorney, of course, can argue about what you've been convicted of, right? That's fair. Yeah. You've been convicted of something, and he or she should be able to emphasize to the judge, like, what's going on.
Right.
But in the case and what was done, but in federal court, the U.S. attorney can bring to the judge's attention crimes that the defendant was actually acquitted of, and the judge can say, you know what, the jury acquitted this defendant of those charges, but I disagree with the jury. I think by the preponderance of the evidence that you're guilty of that. And so when I sentence you on the crime, the little crime that you were committed of, I'm gonna sentence you to the maximum sentence on that because I believe you're guilty on the crimes you were acquitted of. And
Matt, also, I never would have believed that until I experienced it firsthand, and it's insanity.
Who can believe it? Listen, Dominic, it's not something that just happens once in a while.
Right.
This happens every day, and it's been happening for decades, at least 5 decades that I've witnessed. I stand as a witness to this.
And when you think about it, it's basically just negating the jury process. It's just negating it because the jury came to one conclusion, and then the judge is allowed to say, well, I disagree, so I'm going to factor in those other things as well.
Of course. And also, the judge can consider uncharged crimes. In other words, the prosecutor can say, I think Mr. Defendant here, he is suspected of 5 murders. Okay, was that person convicted of those murders? No. Was he indicted for those murders? No. Was he arrested for those murders? No. So how the hell do you ask a judge to consider that? Well, in federal law, the way it's developed, yes, you can. And the judge will say on the record, I am considering these other things, unproven crimes, because the government has proven it to me by the very fact that they're telling me. You know, it's as simple as that. Now, people, you tell that to a regular lawyer, and they'll tell you, listen, pal, you don't know what you're talking. I don't believe you.
Right.
I don't believe that happens.
Yeah.
And
they look at us like we're nuts, and they look at us as if we're trying to bash the government a bit. No, we're just stating the facts, and we're making it clear that this is unacceptable, but yet nobody's doing anything about it. Nobody's doing anything about it.
You know, part of it is to bring that out, because I'm so annoyed, you know, with these, especially in the podcast world, where you got these guys from England, they can't even pronounce the names of the people they're talking about. They got, you know, they have the general facts straight, but like 90% of the factual things they say are incorrect, just goddamn stupid.
Yeah, there's a lot of falsities. Yep.
And these people are getting, you know, thousands and thousands of followers. And then you have the informants, right, who you got to give them credit for being demonically manipulative. I mean, here are people, most of these informants, right, they started out as cheap criminals on the street, and they manipulated everybody, deceived everybody. Then they started hooking themselves into this so-called organized crime, and they deceived them and manipulated them and took advantage of them. And then when it came time to pay the piper and go to jail, then they manipulated the government and deceived the government, okay? Yep. And they get out of jail no matter what they did, all right? And usually the guy who's the informant has done a lot worse things than the guy he's testifying against.
You're not kidding.
And then when they beat the rap, you know, they get away with it all, and now they're going and profiting on the internet and doing all this stuff, which is fine. You know, thank God that they got a legitimate job. But you know, the gullible people out there, they say, oh yeah, this guy was inside. He really knows. You know what they really know, and what they really want to tell you, what's beneficial for them.
Of course, what paints them in the best light. What paints them in the best light. And
some of them are fed information by the government.
Absolutely.
Fed by the government. You could see it. You could see when they're reading a piece of paper that somebody handed to them. You know, so
well, Matt, what's crazy about that is, you know, with these podcasts, and they go on there and they lie and they tell stories, and they actually bash. I have, as you know, I download all these different podcasts for the different informants, and I house them, and there's episodes of them bashing family members, making fun of defendants. I had 2 informants actually on their podcast threaten me publicly. They're gonna do this, they're gonna do that. Now me, I just don't even respond. I don't care what they have to say. But imagine I started doing that, Matt. Imagine I started threatening people and this. You know what kind of problems I would have? They could do whatever they want to do. They could do whatever they want to do.
You don't want to think about the problems you would have.
Of course.
You want to think about the problems you would have for doing half of that.
Exactly.
10% of what they get away with.
You know, it's amazing. It really is amazing. And that's really why, I mean, your podcast is so needed and so important from your experience and your perspective to really show people what goes on, what takes place.
And Dominic, you know, the other side of my podcast is that, you know, people have always said to me, oh, why don't you write the story of your life? Why don't you tell the story of your life? Do a book, do a movie. No way. I mean, that's impossible. And I just can't do it.
Right.
Just can't. But, you know, I thought that this is a good way, trying to identify the problems that we're talking about. But in light of my experiences, not only as a lawyer for 46 years, but growing up on the Lower East Side in Little Italy in the 4th Ward, Knickerbocker Village, you know, knowing people, meeting people, seeing the human side of some of the people that have been demonized by the government is part of what I want to get into. So am I saying that the people that the government says are involved in organized crime are good? Well, you know what? I happen to know a lot of good things about them.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
And I got a right to say that too,
Yep.
and I got a right to talk about stories.
Like
that
anything
I
else,
think
Matt,
are funny.
there's good and bad in everybody. There's good and bad in everybody.
In
like
every
anything else.
person,
Yep.
in every person, there's good and bad. And during the podcast, I don't reveal any kind of confidence of any kind. Not a confidence as a lawyer or as a friend, nothing.
Right.
But I get to tell a lot of funny stories, a lot of lighthearted stories. And as the podcasts go on, episode after episode, the first few podcasts are a little bit on the heavy side, but necessarily so.
Sure.
But the future podcasts are going to be a little bit more lighthearted, a lot more joking around, a lot more funny stories about growing up on the Lower East Side, about being a lawyer and the behind the scenes in all these cases, some of the funny things that happen. Because, if you don't have a good sense of humor, you could never survive.
If you don't have a sense of humor,
lawyer.
yeah, you'd wind up wiping out early on without a sense of humor.
Absolutely.
Yep. And that's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to the different episodes and the first two you put out. And that's why, for me, it's important. The more people doing that, the more people's talking about these things, eventually maybe you get a few members of the public where it starts to click and they realize, all right, it's irrelevant whether these guys are good or bad, but the law has to be followed. Otherwise, it could be a danger for us.
And you kind of hope that maybe some of the young lawyers who become United States attorneys in the future, who become federal judges in the future, might try to see things a little differently than as warriors. It's always been described as a war against organized crime. We're going to obliterate them at all costs. It shouldn't be at all costs. You shouldn't be prostituting yourself and the rules and regulations of our Constitution and our court system and the law as it should be. You shouldn't have to do that to do your job. You could be fair and square, and all the bad guys will go away for what they did wrong, but no one should go away just because they're targeted.
Yeah, well, listen, they expect the defendants and the defense attorneys to follow a certain set of rules. And as you know, if the defense team doesn't follow those rules, forget it. There's big problems.
You're not kidding.
Yeah, so that's where I detach a lot. And that's, to go back to what you said earlier, where people say, oh, they can't do that. I just laugh when somebody tells me, oh, Don, they can't do that. I go, yeah, they can't do that. No, they do it. They do whatever they want. And then it's up to you to fight it. That's really what it boils down to.
Yes.
And it really is, it's disturbing when you look at it. And your podcast is a breath of fresh air, pal. And I'm looking forward to the other episodes coming out. And that's really the whole point of that We Push Back thing. It's really just different content creators bringing attention in our own way, using our own skill set, our own education, just to bring attention to these things. That's really the bottom line.
Absolutely. And all we want people to get out of it is to understand what's happening. Now, you could believe me and don't believe me.
Right.
That's all right. But someone needs to say the truth. And if you don't believe me, then that's okay too.
Yep.
I don't care. But someone needs to educate the public just a little bit. So someone should say, enough is enough. And when it comes to the governments pursuing these kinds of cases, enough is never enough. All right, they just keep going and going, and there's no mercy. And I had a prosecutor tell me about one of my clients that the Judge Block gave him 30 months, and she was so upset because she wanted him to get more. I said, the guy's an old man. He's 70 some odd, and he's getting 30 months. And He didn't do much. And she says, I said to her, what do you want? Was in the hallway in the federal courthouse outside the courtroom.
Right.
And she says, I want your client to die in jail.
Jeez.
And I said to myself, holy shit, she really means that. She's a real, if you didn't know who she was, you'd think she's just a nice little regular lady, and like a school teacher. And she looked me in the eye and said, I want your client to die in jail.
Unbelievable. Wow. Now imagine the defense attorney said that about somebody dying in jail or this.
Yeah.
I tell you, it's just amazing. And what concerns me is, why do you think they take it so personal, Matt? Like, it's a job, it's an occupation. Why do you think they make it so personal?
it's like brainwashing, it's like, this is what you got to do. If you read John Gleason's book, I'm reading it now, and Jerry Capisi happened to give it to me, and I'm reading it, and he talks
What
about...
book is that, Matt? I'm not familiar
John
with that
Gleason has a book out. It's called, 1 minute, might have it right here. It's called The Gotti Wars.
Okay,
Wars.
I wasn't familiar
Not
with
the
that
Gotti
book.
Cases. It's the Gotti Wars. And he talks about being a young man and leaving a top white shoe law firm where he's making big money and had a chance to be partner. And one of the main partners said, stay here. You're going to make partner in this big law firm. He wanted to go into the U.S. Attorney's Office for the glory of battle, And when he got in there, boy, oh boy, I mean, it's when they look upon cases as like they're soldiers going to war, and they look upon the wins as glorification of themselves. It's really frightening.
I think you hit the nail right on the head with the brainwashing. It seems like that they're just molded that way to believe a certain way. Throw the law out the window and just get whoever you got to get your target at all means necessary.
That's it. That's what it's all about. Yep. And it's not changing either. It's not changing.
I see it getting worse almost. And, it's almost getting worse. And I think that's why now more than ever, especially with this influx of all these informant podcasts and all this wrong information and these clip channels we're putting out, promoting all these different things about organized crime, there really needs to just be another side just to explain how the law works, what really goes on, just so a public or a potential juror member could say, hey, you know what, I really need to take my time on this case. I really need to evaluate and follow the threshold of the Constitution. Because that's really what my focus is, just to get to people to think a little bit. That's all, just think a little bit.
And Dominic, part of these podcasts, I'm interested to see how... I know about my podcast. I know about yours.
Yep.
I don't know of many like ours, but I'm just wondering how are the general public, the people who know nothing about this, how are they going to react to us? Are they going to say that we're just fools, that we're shills for organized crime, or are they going to say, oh my goodness, this is wrong?
Well, I'll give you a little insight on that, Matt, because I've been doing this almost 3 years now with my podcast. And the We Pushback Hub that I made for all the other podcasts, that's been about 6 months. And the majority of the people, the majority of the comments I get are positive. The majority of the comments I get are people who go, I was never aware of this, Mr. Crea. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I have a lot of emails from people that actually started off a big informant supporter, and then they would email me and say, I appreciate you bringing to my attention that a lot of this information is false and they're telling a lot of lies, and that's not right. They shouldn't be allowed to lie and be rewarded for lying. So for me, I think it's going to be a positive reception overall. Now, don't get me wrong. You're going to get a lot of lunatics who are commenting on your page saying, oh, you're glorifying the mob and all this. You've seen it firsthand. You've seen it even with me firsthand. That we can't prevent. There's always going to be a lunatic, some unstable person. That's life. I just drown them out. I block them. I don't even care about that. As you said earlier, I'm not here to convince anybody. I just want to put the information out there, and for the open-minded, intelligent individuals, I think they're going to find a lot of value in it.
Yes. Let's hope so.
Yep, absolutely, pal. And it was a great conversation today. If there's anything you want to add, I'm going to be putting your there's going to be a link to your podcast in the description of this video. So listeners, please be sure you click on it. Subscribe to Matt's new podcast, A View from Mulberry Street. You will not be disappointed. It's engaging, it's informative, it's entertaining. And I'm really looking forward to future episodes.
I think YouTube is the best place for my podcast too, because it's the video of the program rather than just an audio.
I agree. That's what I enjoy, and I like to add the graphics, and I liked all the images you added on yours. Really phenomenal work, Matt, and congratulations on it. Best of luck.
Thank you very much, Dominic.
Thank you.
Good luck to you too. We'll be talking soon.
Absolutely, pal. Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So there you have it, folks. I thought it was an excellent episode. I always enjoy Matt's conversation. I really think we touched on a lot of important areas. And Matt and I will be speaking again soon. So That's all we're going to keep doing. Trying to get some information out there, trying to enlighten the public a little bit. So please be sure to check out A View from Mulberry Street on YouTube. And I want to once again thank Mr. Mary for coming on my show and giving me 40 minutes of his time. Take care, listeners. Till next time.
You've been listening to the Justice Tech Pros podcast with Dominic Crea, one of the most unique podcasts on the internet, discussing the obstacles the defense team faces when trying a case, what goes on behind the scenes during pretrial and motion phase, holding defense attorneys accountable, making sure they're fighting for their clients, the difference between textbook law and how things truly play out in a courtroom, and everything in between. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show, and we'll be back soon. Until then, find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Justice Tech Pros. To email the show with questions and comments, it's podcast@justicetechpros.com. Till next time, this is Justice Tech Pros Podcast and Dominic Crea signing off.